Welcome everyone. Uh, Again, we are recording today's session, so if you do not want to be recorded, you can disable the camera function in your Zoom link. If you're new to our gathering, you can please select gallery view in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If you're on an iPad, it's in the upper left. That'll give you the best view. Also, we're creating a directory of the participants. So if you'd like to be in the directory, you can put your name, where you're located. We're organizing by area. So your name, where you're located, and who you studied with in chat at the bottom of your screen. And also in that directory, we're trying to highlight teachers. Not many teachers have done so, but if you are interested, please highlight your name as a teacher. And also, if you would like to include any information related to your website, you're welcome to put that in there as well. Excuse me. I'm Michael Ward. I'm in Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. Our co-host, Redmond Entwistle, is at the controls in London. Morning, Redmond.
Hi, Mike. Morning. Hi, everyone.
I'd like to thank you all for coming today and joining with others, other students who are practicing Tai Chi in the lineage of Professor Cheng. These sessions began as a way to stay connected during a time of social isolation and have since evolved into a forum for sharing more of our Tai Chi practice in a spirit of fellowship and scholarship. We meet here every Wednesday at the same time, and please share the details of these sessions with your students, classmates, teachers. All are welcome to participate. You're welcome to just attend the beginning part of the session in which we do the Tai Chi form, but each week that's going to be followed by a discussion either of an element of Tai Chi practice with a guest leader or an aspect of Chinese culture related to Professor Cheng. The schedule, we'll be sending out an email every Monday with the schedule for the coming weeks. This will be a reminder of the topic 2 days later, as well as the following week. Our hope is that particularly if it's a discussion on a Tai Chi principle, this will give everybody a chance to think about it and have something they'd like to contribute to the discussion. Next week, August 5th, Fred Lehrman will be leading the forum, and then he's going to talk about his time studying with Professor Cheng in New York City and his practice of Tai Chi Chuan since then. Excuse me. As always, today we'll be following a video of Professor Cheng doing the first third of his form. Video was shot by Ken Van Sickle. We'll go through this twice. And then Maria Grazia, who will lead another first third of the form. Redmond will be announcing the postures as we go. After Maria finishes her form, Barbara Davis is going to give a lecture on Professor Cheng's paintings. At the age of 22, Professor Cheng attained a high level of mastery in the traditional three excellences of painting, poetry, and calligraphy. Barbara will discuss Professor's art career and show slides of his painting, followed by some questions and answers. So if you'd like to take a moment to get ready, we're ready to begin.
Preparation. Beginning. Raise hands. Ward off left. Ward off right. Roll back. Press. Push. Single whip. Lift hands. Strike with the shoulder. White crane spreads wings. Brush left knee. Play guitar. Brush left knee. Step forwards. Block. Parry. Punch. Withdraw. Push. Cross hands. And back to preparation. Beginning. Raise hands. Ward off left. Ward off right. Roll back. Press. Push. Single whip. Lift hands. Strike with shoulder. White crane spreads wings. Brush left knee. Play guitar. Brush left knee. Step forwards. Block. Parry. Punch. Withdraw. Push. Cross hands.
Great. We'll now be going to Maria Grazia. She studied with Laura Brandemarti Artru, who studied with Frank Wong in North Carolina, Ben Lowe, and William C.C. Chen. Laura was perhaps the first introducing the form of Cheng Manqing to Italy in the early 90s. Now Maria Grazia teaches Tai Chi Chuan with Sharon Gould in Milan. So Maria, if you'd like to go ahead and lead us through a third.
Preparation. Beginning. Raise hands. Board off left. Board off right. Roll back. Press. Push. Single whip. Lift hands. Strike with shoulder. White crane spreads wings. Brush left knee. Play guitar. Brush left knee. Step forwards. Block. Parry. Punch. Withdraw. Push. And cross hats. And closure.
Thank you, Maria. That was beautiful. Do you have something you'd like to say to the group?
Yes, I've been watching you since the beginning, and it helped me so much especially during the lockdown. It seemed to me to be like any big family, very, very nice practicing with such a lot of persons. Many thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to go now to Barbara Davis. Barbara Davis is going to do a presentation lecture on Professor Cheng's paintings. Barbara began studying Tai Chi in the mid-1970s in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and continued at the Naropa Institute summer program with Ed Young, Maggie Newman, and Wolf Lowenthal before commencing study with Mr. Liu in Taiwan in the late 1980s. She completed a master's degree in East Asian Studies at the University of Minnesota. Barbara is author of the Tai Chi Chuan Classics, an annotated translation and translated by Chen Ming's Tai Chi sword form. She published the Tai Chi Chuan Journal from 2000 to 2005, and she now teaches at Great River Tai Chi Chuan in Minneapolis. She's working on a biography of Professor Cheng, and information about the biography can be found at www.chengmanching.wordpress.com, chengmanching.wordpress.com. So Barbara, if you want to go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Redmond. And thank you, Barry, for getting this forum together. It's just been a wonderful way to connect with people and share ideas. I wanted to talk today about Professor's art career, partly because a lot of people don't know much about it. And when I began doing research, I at first didn't believe all these things that I heard about him. And then I discovered that everything was true, and including about his art career. He was quite well known and in his 20s. And so I wanted to just introduce some of his artwork to you. I'll show you some slides, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. There's some photographs also, so you'll be able to kind of get a taste of what his earlier life was before Tai Chi. So I'm gonna go to sharing the screen so you can see everything, and that looks okay, right? Everybody can see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So I wanted to talk about his life in art, and of course this is much more material than I could cover. We could do a whole month on this, right? And so I'm just going to be doing an overview, and I wanted to talk about the methods he used, the genres, the ideas and styles, and the links to Taiji practice, all in this short little talk. And the resources are in the chat that Redmond posted in the chat, so you can see some of the material that I'm using. So this very first painting on the title here is from 1947, and this is just a typical floral painting, and we can see how just much liveliness there is in it. And let me try and get rid of that. Okay, and now we're going to go back in time, if I can get my thing to work here. There we go. Okay. And so this is approximately, he's approximately 30 years old in this photo, which I think is from a art yearbook of some kind. So in 1924, he put together this album, and the album is of orchids and other flowers, other plants, and 5 of the leaves of the 5 of the 8 leaves have inscriptions of his poetry on them. And so you can see a wonderful liveliness in this painting. So he was about 22 years old when he did this. And the poem reads something like, whenever I paint confidently an orchid, I can sometimes unexpectedly meet with a method of nourishing the chi, and then it's warmed and rises and blends together. And so it's, you know, you really get a feeling of that rising of the orchid from the roots and moving. And as we've been doing these Taiji sessions following his video, I really every so often get the feeling of how he moved to do like the orchid leaf here. So I think you can see my cursor here. So this reminds me of how his arm moves in single whip, you know, just this nice arching kind of motion. And so a lot of lessons that we can learn from looking at his artwork for our Taiji practice. This album, just a couple more things about it, is that this album became an important part of his life. And he used it basically as a calling card, as a portfolio. He showed it to different leading artists and other friends, and a number of them wrote what's called a colophon, which is an attachment, so to speak, in their own calligraphy. Sometimes a poem, sometimes just a prose thing, extolling his talents. And one of the plates, I'll show you later, says 3 perfections or 3 excellences. So at this time, that was how he was aspiring to and reaching this level of attainment in the different arts. And so this is before medicine and before Taiji. And the 3 excellences or three perfections are, it's a term used throughout history for people who had mastered poetry, painting, calligraphy, and such. And there are other masters of five perfections. It might not be the same as professors, but this was kind of a way of categorizing people's attainments and the respect that people in China had for this breadth of attainment, as opposed to, I think in the West, where we think, you know, you have to become a master in just one thing. This is more of a Renaissance man kind of thing. And so now we'll look at some flowers from that same period, from 1920s. And this is kind of an outline style of painting, but it still has this vitality to it that I think is quite delightful. And in this period of time, in 1927, I believe it was the first national exhibit of Chinese painting. And Professor and his aunt, Zhang Hongwei, were both in that exhibition. So he was in two national exhibitions. He had many. He had a couple of solo exhibits, and he had participated in many other group exhibits along with his aunt. And also in the 1930s, they were in a European exhibit. So here's an example of a painting by his teacher, Wang Yuyan. And Wang taught in Wenzhou, which was their hometown. And Wang had quite a number of really high-level students. And so Professor's aunt was probably one of the older ones. And she was born in the 1870s. And the Ma brothers were another set of artists and they were all working later together in Shanghai in the art colleges. And so this is a detailed style brush, the Gongbi brush, and so it requires a different skill than the more expressive style, which is called xie, which is painting the thoughts. And so this style allows for a lot more detail work, more accuracy in terms of the depiction of the subject of the painting, and allows for more layering of paint. And so you're working with a drier brush, you're working with thicker pigments, and you might be working on a sized paper. So I think of this as being a little bit similar, not quite, but a little bit similar to what the botanical art styles in the United States and Europe. So here's a picture of Zhang Hongwei. And so I think you can see the resemblance to some of, to Professor and to certain people in Professor's family, who I think are on the call today. And so she was a well-known calligrapher, artist, poet, so master of the three excellences. And she also was very involved with art education, both before the Civil War and after. And so she stayed in the mainland after the end of the Civil War. And here's one of her pieces. So this is part of what the genre is called birds and flower paintings. And so Professor and his aunt and their teacher were exemplars of this particular style. Another genre that you are probably all familiar with is Chinese landscape painting. Professor did landscape painting too, but he was particularly known for the birds and flowers. So here's a painting, I mean a photograph of the group of people who worked at the Chinese Culture College. This was a college that Professor and his colleagues founded after teaching at the Shanghai Art College. The Shanghai Art College was one of the leading art education institutions in China. And there's been a couple of books written about it, and you can see those listed in the chat box. And at the Shanghai Art College tried to merge Eastern and Western training. And so this is a time in China when there was a lot of modernization and there was a lot of Westernization. A lot of Chinese students were going overseas to study in Japan or in France, and they were coming back with new ideas about education, new ideas about methods and subjects to paint, such as nudes, for instance, and oil paints and all this. So there was a lot of controversy at the Shanghai Art College. And so Professor and others started this new college, the Chinese Culture College, in order to teach more, to focus more on traditional arts and the breadth of curriculum that they felt was important, such as poetry. And they actually had Tai Chi classes there too. I don't know who taught them or who arranged that. But Professor was one of the head administrators of the group, and Huang Binghong, who you see on the right, far right in the front row, was the president of the college. Professor is right behind him in the third row back. And on the far left, we see Professor's aunt, Zhang Hongwei. So she was also on the faculty. In the middle left, we see Tsai Yun-pei, who is the leading Chinese education reformer and the president of the Beijing University. And he was instrumental in all of these educational institutions. And he was a good friend of Professor's aunt's husband. And so there were a lot of interesting connections to explore there among the educational world. And here's a lotus painting from the 1930s. And this one was included in the exhibit that went to France and I believe Germany and some other locales in 1933. And so Professor, as we've talked about, today is his Western birthday, July 29th. And so by my calculation, he would be 118 years old if he were around still. And he liked to, because he was born right by the birthday of the lotus, he liked to paint the lotus flower on his birthday. And so we'll look at this one compared to a later one a little bit later. You can see also his calligraphy changing over time. And already you're seeing in this painting a little bit of change into a more substantial kind of stroke that he's using. And Natasha will be talking about his calligraphy in August. So she'll be able to go into the various ideas behind his calligraphy more. But you should know that the calligraphy and the painting went hand in hand. So the kind of strokes that you use in calligraphy and the kind of strokes that you use in painting are exactly the same. Of course, with painting, there's a lot more of a variation that you can do in terms of using different types of brushes, maybe a stiffer brush or a more soft brush. And you can manipulate the bristles in different ways to get different textures and things. But the basic concept of one stroke being unites everything and contains everything is there, whether it's the calligraphy or the painting. Professor retired from the art world, basically, from the teaching world, I should say. And he had also been very instrumental in founding and participating in numerous art societies, such as the Bee Society. And he drew back from all of that. He kept painting and everything, but he started studying with, obviously he was studying Tai Chi at this time. He had already started practicing medicine, and he was studying essay writing and poetry with Chen. And so this is an album he did with Chen's son-in-law, who was also a student there. And in this painting, even though you can see the calligraphy, it still has kind of a light touch. You can see it's a lot more upright, and there's just a different feeling to the stroke in that. And this whole album is of insects of various kinds. So there's spiders and other kinds of insects in there. So 10 years later, here we have a nice painting, a floral painting. And so in this one, I wanted to invite you to imagine you've got this long strip of paper in front of you, and how are you going to start painting that? So the first step is you have to envision in your mind what the painting is going to be, because this paper is unforgiving. Okay, so it's like, you know, the absorbency is similar to newsprint. So if you think about a high quality, if there were such a thing as high quality newsprint, you would stand in front of it, you would envision the painting, you would get the right load of ink on your brush, and then you would start. You wouldn't, you need to envision it first. And so you can see how the idea here has to hang on this stem. And then you have to allow space for all of the petals and leaves to go into there. And so everything has to be envisioned ahead of time. Then you lay in all of that, and then afterwards you're gonna let it dry for a bit, and then you're gonna come back and put in some of the colors, some of the washes, and then this you can see while there's a petal formed here, he's gone in while it's still slightly damp and put in the veins. And to be able to, you have to be able to manipulate that. You have to know exactly what the humidity is that day and what the load of water and ink is in your brush in order to get the timing right, so that you don't end up with just a big blob, right? And then finally, when you're done with that, everything's dried, then you're gonna come back in and do your calligraphy, or perhaps do that at a different time, and then finally put your seals on the painting. So here he is at work in Taipei about 10 years later. And here you can see the stroke he's just finished with his brush of the grass or orchid, whatever it is he's painting. And you can see exactly what I'm talking about. It's like doing single whip, that your hand with the brush is very relaxed, and your arms just curve through the space to form that Taiji move. And that's exactly the same practice as here. And here is a good example of the calligraphy changes. So you can see his calligraphy is just getting more and more powerful, more dense, more rooted. And then this painting, this lovely painting of the gourd, you can see here's a bamboo coming through here. And again, your idea has to go all the way through this whole thing, even though you're breaking to give a little space for the joints. You have one idea connecting everything, and one idea coming down and connecting into the gourd, and just the weight of that gourd. And so I always look at this painting when I'm thinking about four corners, because it reminds me to drop my elbows and to feel the weight of the elbows, that the weight is always going downward. When Professor moved to Taiwan at the end of the Civil War in 1949, he formed more different groups of poets and painters. And so this group is the Seven Friends of Painting. We see 5 of them here. And these art societies would gather sometimes, like in Shanghai, on a weekly basis, sometimes a nightly basis. There'd be kind of a clubhouse, or they'd meet at a restaurant or whatever. And there were times that the people would paint a painting together. And so this particular painting that they're doing, I don't know if it's just this artist doing the painting or whether they're taking turns doing parts of the paintings. But this was a common practice, was to write poetry together, to paint paintings together. And sometimes they were in commemoration of an event like somebody's birthday, or they might have been done and then auctioned off to raise funds for a charity. And so this was a very common kind of occurrence. The 7 friends also exhibited together regularly in Taiwan. So here's a nice, simple painting from 1947. So as he got older, I feel that his compositions became more and more simple in some ways, you know, just looking for the essence. So this is around 1970, and he had, as people have talked about before, he had been given some sheets of very valuable paper when he was leaving the mainland. And some of them were a couple hundred years old. So they're very valuable. And so I think he waited for the right moment to work on those. And you see one of these large scale paintings behind him. I don't have the dimensions of these, but there is one listed in one of the art catalogs that says it was about 8 feet high and 12 feet long. So quite large. And so that meant you had to find a space to work on it too. And one of them he worked on in the conference room at the land bank, I think it was. And, you know, just a host of people came to watch him paint, and they helped grind the ink and prepare the colors and everything. And so this is kind of a all-day kind of affair, you can imagine. And just takes a tremendous amount of concentration to and pre-planning in your head, and then to actually do the painting. So here's a smaller scale. And there's controversy over what his birth year was. It's sometimes listed, you know, I've seen everything from 1899 to 1903 or something. The Chinese calendar and calculations are different, you know, than the Western calendar. And so that's why today is his birthday on the Western calendar, but the Chinese calendar is a lunar calendar. So it's the 6th month on the lunar calendar. And so one of the ways that I ascertained that what year he was born was by what year he was in terms of the zodiac, and he was a tiger year. So here we see he has a tiger seal on this painting of the plums. So the tiger year for that era is 1902. So you can see the calligraphy again here, how solid it is. This is very inspiring. So here we can compare the 2 different lotus paintings from the 1931 and 1971, which he painted in New York on his birthday. And you can just relish those colors, just wonderful colors. Here's a close-up. And again, it's all about the balance, the flow, the chi, and the liveliness that goes into all of these. So I'm going to end here with this wonderful sunflower painting. And this is also 1971. And I can guess from the size of the chops that this was a larger painting. And you can see I just feel like the sunflowers are bending over at the end of the day, and you know, following the sun, because that's what they do. They're sunflowers, and then they're looking at this inscription, and the first line of the inscription is New York, the Tower of the Long Evening. And so it's very fitting, the way this comes together. So I wanted to allow time for questions and answers. And so I'll quit the screen share if I can. And then just if people have questions, you can either put them in the chat or speak up.
Barbara, this was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. Could you answer a question about the term album? I'm not really sure. I can't envision an album. So can you tell me what you mean by an album?
I haven't seen this actual album. I've seen photos of it, but I imagine it's about this big. And so you would take your paintings and mount them on some stiffer board, like a cardboard, you know, a kind of cardboard backing, and then put them together. And you might have calligraphy on one side, like in the insect album, calligraphy and painting, or just the painting. And then it'll be mounted and bound together in some way. And so it's a little bit fluid because you can change the order or the binding or whatever. Chinese painting is a little more fluid than Western painting, you know, and you can roll it up and put it in your sack and take it somewhere.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Barbara, I have a question. It's Barry.
Mm-hmm.
You said that he sort of thought out his paintings ahead of time. Did he ever work spontaneously, do you know?
Oh, well, I mean, it's kind of one and the same, I think, because when you're doing the Chinese painting, there's a spontaneity because you're working in that moment. What I mean is that you're standing there, you're looking at the paper, and you know, I didn't ever meet him, so I didn't get to watch him do this. But maybe somebody else can speak to that, like Katie maybe. But I took painting lessons where I would watch my teacher spread out the paper, smooth it out, fuss with the paperweight, and then just sit there for a minute, just kind of gauging the situation, and then start to paint. You know, so there's a preparatory period, but then you're doing it. So it's not like you have to think for hours and hours, unless it's maybe a big one. But it's very spontaneous, and then you're encountering different things happening because the paper maybe has a little imperfection, or the brush skips in a way that you didn't anticipate, and so it is very in the moment. It's like push hands, you know, you're just adapting to what's happening.
Barbara, it did very good. Remember me? I'm Katie. Katie Cheng. Nice to see you. You know, I know you're a writer, but you're not a painter. But you describe very nice, very nice. And
thank you.
You know, yeah, my father painted the lotus flower. Really, I always watching him, you know, have a very big brush, and he just one stroke for whole big leaves. And I asked my father, you know, how do you know how much water you need to see the ink and the water? He said, you have to prepare how big you're going to do, and you need to know how much water and ink in your brush. And when he do the painting, you know, actually is related with the Tai Chi. You know, when he get more solid in the Tai Chi, you know, and his painting will be more solid. Anyway, you know, we see he work with the hands, right? Actually, he's working on his feet. The leg is tired, more than tired than the hands. Yeah, he loved the lotus flower, and also in the beginning, I start learn painting is Chinese brush painting. But the second year, I changed my mind because I told my father, the Chinese painting is very hard because one drop, you have ink right on inside the brush. One drop down the paper and it's destroying my paper. And those rice paper is very expensive at the time. I told my father, I like to do the Western painting instead of Chinese painting. He said, no problem. It's actually, you're Chinese, later you do the Western painting, you have a personality inside you. It's developed from you and it's still Chinese. He's told me that. Yeah.
Katie, can I ask you, Katie?
Uh-huh.
It's Natasha here. I remember him telling a story about that when he was born, the lotus came out. Usually it's quite exceptional to have, what you have one flower on the end of one stem, but when he was born, there was either 2 flowers or maybe even 3 flowers per stem. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, that's very rare.
And that's
to
why
have
he called the lotus man. I mean,
right, mostly the one stem with one flower, but with one stem with 2 flowers is very rare.
Very rare,
yeah.
It came out on he told us, he would tell us stories. I mean, Ed would remember better the accurate thing, but I don't know whether it was where he was born, but anyhow, it came out that day with 2 flowers per stem.
Right.
So, he's always felt associated with the lotus.
Yeah, that means he's very special, right? Yeah.
And there's also another story that he used to say. There was some king, and I can't remember who it was, or emperor or whatever, somebody who had a bird that they loved very much. And so they thought they ought to get somebody to paint the bird before the bird died. So everybody in the land, he asked around and found out there was this particular painter who was very famous, who really was the best person to do it. So he went to see the painter, and the painter said, yes, Your Highness, it will take me 3 years to do it. So come back in 3 years' time. And when he came back, the emperor or king or whoever it was said, oh, could I have my bird now? And he said, could I see my bird? He said, just a minute. So he took out a piece of paper and he did it in 2 seconds, And the emperor said, why did I have to wait 3 years for this? It just took you a few seconds. He said, oh, you want to see? So he took him out to another room in the house, and it was just full of papers of, he'd been practicing the bird, basically. So it's, in terms of premeditated and spontaneous, that's what the Chinese painting, it's got both in it, because you have to practice and practice and practice to be spontaneous. I mean, each time it's spontaneous, but that requires a lot of kung fu behind you, so.
My father not practice very much. He's using his mind.
Yeah.
When he, once my mother brought a turtle, supposed to, send the turtle away, leave him alive. But my father said, okay, let me take a look. So he take a look on the turtle walking, swimming. Then he said, okay, you can send the turtle away. And he just do the painting by his mind.
Yeah.
He have all those practice in his mind already.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I went once with Ed. When we went to Taiwan, and Professor Cheng told us we had to get there at 5 o'clock in the morning to the house, and he was up in his tower, and he started chatting with us, and he was just putting the brush in the water and putting the brush in the, what we thought was he was just adjusting his brush on the paper, like to make it into a point or something like that. And suddenly, after a few minutes, he just did a few strokes and it all connected together. And what we thought were just preparations were the actual peonies that he painted. And then he just took, did a thinner line and it connected it all up. So, again.
Yeah, you see his lotus flower leaves, right? Lotus leaves.
Yeah.
Have a shadow and already have a highlight only one stroke make the highlight and the ink, you know.
Yeah.
It's very amazing. But you know, like a Western, we do the drawing, we need to do the shadow, lighter, you know, take a time, right? He just one stroke and have a few strokes, have a big leaves already, you know, there. And in Chinese painting, you cannot change, you know, like Western, we can cover with the oil painting over and over.
Yeah.
But the Chinese ink,
No
you
correction.
cannot. Right.
You have to start again.
Yeah.
And what I love also was his black and white had so much color that almost, it has, for me, I remember them almost more colorful than the colored paintings.
Yes.
The colored
Right.
paintings are not as interesting to me as the black and white, which seem to have more color in them than the colors.
Yes. It's like a 10 different level. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing. Barbara, I love all these things. Is it, how do we see, or have you written a book with some of these photographs in it and things like that? It's just so lovely to, you know, to see all those photos and everything.
Well, I can show you, there's several albums, but they're all out of print. So this is from the exhibit at the Palace Museum that was held in the 1980s. And this is from the 1971 exhibit.
Yes, I remember that book, and it has a lot of, like, the gourd, and it has the bird, the yellow bird.
Yeah, there's some overlap between all of these. This is a short.
That I remember because we did that.
From the Hudson River
Museum
show in 1973, and there's a similar looking one from the Paris exhibit from 1963, but the contents are slightly different. And so this has some.
Yes, I know. I know.
Yeah. And then there's this one from the 1960s.
Oh wow, beautiful one.
And so again, there's some overlap, and some different ones. And I wanted to show, we were talking about that small album before, and I wanted to show you where I saw the album, which is in this one.
That one, yeah.
And so here are the
right, that's why I've seen some of them before, yeah.
Right. And I'll tell you that I spent a year working on just studying this album.
Wow.
Because each plate has poetry and symbolism in it, and you have to figure out what all of it means. And then in addition, there are the colophons. And so here are the first colophons. So you see the large characters, those are by Tsai Yun-pei, the educational reformer, and that says the 3 perfections. And then the other ones on this page are by Wu Changshi and other famous painters. And then the last set, it took us a while to figure this out, but the ones on this side are by, it turns out by a Japanese artist named Kansetsu Hashimoto. And he wrote actually 2 colophons for the same album. And then on the other side, you see Professor's own colophon, looking back from the 1960s on how he loved this album and how important a role it played in his life.
Barbara, this is Carol Schmidt. I just noticed that in the 7th painting, Friends photo, there, he was, only he and one other gentleman, I think, were in Chinese dress. The other Western dress. And I appreciate that about him. I went to India once and I was happy to see the men wearing traditional dress. So I appreciated that. Thank you.
Barbara, there's a few questions in the chat. So Chidori asks, is there any relation to the professor's paintings and his martial arts?
I think I've made that case. You know, it's all about chi and about rootedness, connectedness, line, expression of your sentiments. All of those elements, I think, are true no matter what art you're working in. And I look at Professor as a model of how to unite those arts. So, you know, I've got a lot of different interests. And one of the things that I was told early on in college was you have to focus on one thing. Well, that's not how my mind works, for one thing, but the other thing is that through studying the professor and his arts, I've learned how you can bring your arts together. Okay, so there's no difference then between holding the brush and holding the sword, holding an acupuncture needle. All of these things are the same. And it's all about just that idea of being connected, and I think about authenticity, you know, that you're really in it and you're really connected and you're not faking it in any way. So those are some of the ways I think that it connects.
And maybe connected to that, Anna Grisevich asked, did Professor stand when he painted?
You'll have to ask Katie or Ellen for that, or Natasha. Can one of
usually yes. I mean, especially if he was doing a big one, but most of the time. I mean, when he did calligraphy in the calligraphy class, then he'd sit. But if he was doing a painting, like when he did one, he did a demonstration at the Hudson River Museum for that show. He did bamboos, and definitely standing, because as Katie just said, he was actually painting from the feet. You know, this is why it was Tai Chi. It was, you know, it's like it comes through the legs, rooted in the ground, comes through the legs, directed by the waist, and comes out manifested through the hands. It's the same thing. That's why it's so powerful too, because it just has all that soft and yet powerful.
Yeah.
And you know, the first one, the first painting, Barbara, you showed the first painting when he was 20, you know.
Yeah.
With those, yeah. And the poetry, you know, I saw that he said, when I'm painting, you know, his mind is just realize like the, you know, for the healthy life. And the painting, the poetry is there. And, you know, and he feels very interesting, but I cannot describe very good. Maybe my sister, Ellen, can do that. Ellen, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, the first painting, 爸爸的那个诗, can you take a look on the first painting? Barbara, can you show the first picture again?
You know what I'd like to suggest though is that maybe we could do a different time, just looking at the poems, because some of these poems are very difficult. You know, it's not like light poetry. Some of it is very difficult poetry, and so we could actually prepare. Maybe we could select a few paintings to discuss in depth and present the poetry too. How about that?
Yes.
Good.
Okay. Well, oh my gosh, of course, I have a painting. The one that's the lotus. I paint the lotus laughs at me. Wait a second.
Barbara, while Natasha's getting the painting, Carolyn Hoffman asks, could you talk a little bit about the seals, about his seals?
Yes, when I've been looking at his work, I've just, because I love seals, I don't know why, but I really like them. And so I started making a chart of what I was finding and what paintings they were used on and what they said. And I so far have found over 70 different seals on his paintings. And this was not uncommon, you know, because people had seals for their names. They had seals for their studio name, which maybe could change over time. Or in Professor's case, the names he used changed over time. And there might be seals for your mood at the time. And so there's a lot of different types of seals. And you can have, you know, your name in red or in white with the red background or red with the white background. You could maybe be given a seal by a friend, or you could commission a seal. And I think there were some seals that he actually designed and had friends carve. And he was friends with some very, very famous seal carvers. And so these were just things that artists gave each other gifts often of these kinds of accoutrements. And so there'd be inscriptions on them, or, you know, somebody would give a painting, the other person would make a seal, and things like that. Yeah.
Can you
highlight?
Yeah.
Can you see this?
Yes, very nice. Nice. Yeah.
I don't know if I can get high enough up to show the bottom. The bottom of it. Now, of course, I'm going to have difficulty getting down. I can't reach the bottom, and I can't.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Now I'm in trouble. I can't reach the bottom.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
But the poem is beautiful too.
Uh-huh.
Katie, can you see the poem?
Mm-hmm.
It's I paint the something like I paint the lotus laughs at me.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-oh.
Barbara, is that a tradition to put the poem on each painting?
Mm-hmm.
It's not required, but it's tradition to. I mean, it's a way of presenting a painting. I asked a friend who's a Chinese art expert, and she said that sometimes people would paint the painting at a different time, or do the poem at a different time, but they would leave room for. There would be room for an inscription, but normally a painting would at least be signed and have a seal on it. I had a painting given to me by my painting teacher, and he purposely put a seal on it and signed it in a certain way so that I would not be able to resell it. You know, he trusted me, but he didn't trust me. You know, so he put a certain inscription and seal on it so that a collector would know that it was not meant to be a for sale item.
There's a question from Stanley Wu Yang, it's for Katie and Ellen. I'm wondering whether Professor Cheng started his calligraphy with Wei Bei. Hi, Stanley, you might have to reiterate your question.
What your question is, what you say? Wei Bei, what is that?
Stanley?
No, can you repeat what you say again?
Yes, I'm going to see if Stanley could. Stanley, could you ask the question? Okay, he's saying, I'm wondering whether Professor Cheng started his calligraphy with Wei Bei, W-E-I hyphen B-E-I.
Wei Bei, I never heard that.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? Wait.
Not sure. Stanley?
It's a name.
Hello?
It's the name of somebody. Barbara, do you know who he studied with?
Well, he started with his mother, and then he, I think just, you know, one of the things that I've come to appreciate about him was that he was really, really good at teaching himself a lot of things. He studied with books and observation and studying with teachers. And so he was the kind of person who I think would probably, well, I know he went out and bought reproductions of art and copied those to study. And so but he studied them in a lot of depth. And so I think he had a lot of different influences through time, and you know, started with kind of the standard script and the Wang Xizhi calligraphy models, and then moved on from there. And we can see the different influences in his work. And then, you know, I think we can talk about that more when Natasha gives her talk. This will be something that we can discuss more at that time.
Yeah, Barbara, you'll have to do all the filling in of the details. But for instance, do you know the name of the person who's, I don't know any facts, but do you know the name of the person that he was, when he was too ill to do anything, he was grinding ink for a painter?
Yeah, that was the painting teacher, Wang Ruyan.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, who that we saw the painting of the birds.
Okay, that's what I.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have a quick question. Do you know if he has any lineage of students that carried on his works with painting or calligraphy?
You know, that's a really interesting question. I've only come across a few names of people who studied with him. And I think one of the interesting things that was going on during that period of time was that in the 1920s was that the people, the very people who were being asked to teach at these art colleges were people who had not gone to art colleges, at least in the Chinese end of it. You know, there were Western painters who were coming back from the West and teaching. Maybe some of them had studied in colleges, but at that time, artists were learning from master to disciple. And so yet they were turning around and having to teach and figure out curriculum for teaching in an institution. And so probably, I would imagine he was probably too busy to have many private students of any kind. And again, this is something that you know, we can investigate further. But I think that he probably had a lot of students through the years. And remember also that he was an administrator too at some of these schools. So he was quite busy. So there were people who studied with him, but I don't have any evidence of like a lineage, you know, that kind of approach that he did with Taiji.
But he was teaching Madame Chiang Kai-shek.
True. That's probably the most
illustrious student of his.
Yeah. Yeah. And her work is actually not that bad. You know, it wasn't just a gratuitous kind of situation. One of the points I wanted to make though is that by my studying his art career, one of the insights I had was that he, you know, sometimes we get focused on New York and Shizhong just because that's our connection or our experience, but the innovations he did in the 1970s and 1960s in his Taiji teaching were, you can see the roots of all of that in the 1920s. So it's one continual pattern with him, is that he was not just a master of five excellences, he was a teacher. Okay, and he studied and learned and he taught his whole life. And so I think we forget that, and that the roots of what we encounter with his Taiji in his 60s and 70s is all rooted in what his experiences were earlier in life.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd throw in something about those albums you guys talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of these so-called albums, well, from what I can understand and what I see is that they are sometimes one long strip of paper. You know, was like 8 or 10 paintings on it.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do is you fold them, you know, like a zigzag.
Like accordion, yeah.
Yeah. Instead of using, because back in those days, they didn't make a lot of books. So rather, they use a long piece of paper and they put a lot of paintings on it. And then they can fold it and become an album.
Yeah.
Okay, and also another thing I want to talk about is that, you know, Barbara talked about a tiger seal. I couldn't see the seal, but if you guys ever see a seal he has one seal that was most interesting to me. Is tiger, cat.
Mama
Has anybody seen that?
Mama hoo hoo.
Yeah, Mama hoo hoo, yeah.
Yeah.
The tiger, cat, and cat seal, it means
not so good.
What it means is it's okay. You know, it's just his way of being humble. You know, like, oh, it's okay. You know, because tiger and cat kind of look similar. So you know, he's just being humble about that. And one other thing I thought I might want to add is, you know, a lot of his, most of his teaching, well, in the Chinese ways anyway, you know, like you have to want to learn. You know, it's not that he wants to be a teacher, that you know, he's doing it for fame or for money or anything like that. But a lot of times is that the student really wants to learn, they'll go to him. You know, kind of like whoever said like a disciple thing, rather than a teacher, a student, like a school. Because for the longest time, Chinese didn't have like a very like a school system. They have disciples and masters, you know, who pass on their skills and knowledges. But one of the most important teaching of his, to me, is Tai Chi. And that's why we all here, right? Because he feels that to teach Tai Chi to people is to give them health. Rather than, you know, pass on a skill, he wants to pass on health and healthy attitudes. You know, healthy exercise and attitudes. Does that make any sense to anybody?
Yeah, a lot. And it also makes everything else that you do be influenced by the Tai Chi. You know, anything that you want to do will be done better if you're doing Tai Chi.
Right, but he's most happy with Tai Chi because every time he goes to a school, he's happy. He told me that once, you know, his medical expertise, he said that, you know, every time he see a patient, most of the time, you know, somebody's sick, ill of some kind, right? So it's not a very, very happy thing. But Tai Chi, every time he goes to school, it's a very happy thing. That's why he wrote that Hall of Happiness, that whole big thing of Hall of Happiness, because he's happy, you know, when he shared Tai Chi with people.
Patrick? Hello? Patrick?
Yeah.
This is David Baer in Pittsburgh. I remember when you were here in Pittsburgh, you would tell a story about when your father would get mad at you and chase you around with a hairbrush, but he couldn't hit you because he couldn't transfer his cheek. Could you relate that story again?
That's one story I don't want to talk about. Well, basically what happened, I'll make the long story short, because these people that study martial arts, sometimes not intentionally, you know, that he has so much internal energy in him that it might hurt somebody internally. So he makes it a point that he never hit me with his hands. So whenever he wants to punish me, he look for a stick of some kind. And of course, you know, I hide all the stick in the house, so he wouldn't find the sticks to beat me. I mean, not use the word beat me, to discipline me.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Just to say that he
Okay.
used to have
Hey,
to try to find
I'm
his-
sorry. Just to add one more thing. See, the Chinese, this is really for Barbara, because Barbara said everything so beautifully, so nicely. I just thought that Barbara should understand that the Chinese ink painting or calligraphy has a lot to do with energy, internal energy, because they say that when you're really good at something, your calligraphy or painting is not just on the surface of the painting. It's through the papers. So they say that you know, like if you have a lot of internal energy or good energy, your energy will go through the paper. You can see it in the back of the paper. Okay. Now, to having ideas like that, I think that his Tai Chi really helps his painting and calligraphy. And that's why his calligraphy changes over the years. As his Tai Chi, as his internal energy develops, as his Tai Chi get better and better, his calligraphy get heavier and heavier, because his internal energy is showing through the brush paint onto the paper. Does that make any sense?
Yes. Yes, very good.
Thank you. And it reveals your personality too.
Yes, you're right. I think you're absolutely right. You know, because it shows, you know, the painting, the calligraphy, and the way you design that painting, everything affects your personality. I think your personality shows up on the paper.
This is all great. One of the things I wanted to say, Barbara, is we'd love to take you up on that idea of focusing on, you know, maybe just a couple paintings and the calligraphy and poetry associated with them, and really go into it in more depth. I think that'd be a fascinating way to approach it. We're going to be wrapping up here shortly. Are there any last questions or comments that people would like to make?
Hi, I just want to jump in to say thank you to Barbara.
Thank you.
Very good to see you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Barbara.
Very good job. Very good job.
I have to say that I had the delightful time a number of years ago visiting with all of you in North Carolina, and it was not only a research trip, but it was just like just fun, you know, because we stayed up late singing, eating at Patrick's restaurant. It was just such a delightful time.
Yes.
And I want to emphasize to people that you know, when I began working on this project, I had no idea how much material there would be, and also just how you know, various demands on my time and things like that. And since Professor worked in 5 different disciplines professionally, it's an enormous amount of material to deal with, and so I'm looking at these big themes, because otherwise we could be you know, spending 10 years studying each one of his disciplines. And so the medical material, for instance, that he left behind, various treatises on medicine and then various formulas and things like that. His poetry, he left behind at least 2 volumes of poetry that were published, plus the poems that are on his paintings. He left behind hundreds of paintings and then hundreds of Taiji students. So
more like thousands.
Yeah. And so I've interviewed a lot of people. I've looked at a lot of the material, and it's so interesting. All of it's so interesting. And part of it is just how do we put all this information together that people can access the information and bring it into the world so that another generation can read it and encounter his.
Great idea. Thank you.
Barbara, I remember you lost your recorder. Did you find it?
No.
Oh.
No, but fortunately I had backed almost everything up. So,
good.
and I took notes. If you remember, I always took
Right.
notes.
Yes.
And that's exactly why.
Well, let me take 1 minute and throw in something that I don't know if everybody's heard of it, but I think everybody knew that when he was young, after he teach in the colleges, he got sick of
TB.
What do you call that?
Lung.
Lung disease. What do you call that?
Tuberculosis.
Tuberculosis.
TB, right? TB. Anyway, he got real sick of the lung disease, and he went to see a doctor, and the doctor told him basically this is at like a 3rd stage or something like that, which means it's very serious. Yeah, you're about to die. So the Chinese doctor told him, you go home and wait to die. So he went home. He was very ill, very sick. And just to back up what Barbara said earlier, that he's very good at teaching himself, he went home, wait to die. And he figured, well, there's nothing to do. So he collected all these medical books. He went out and bought and collect all of these medical books to study and healed himself of this lung disease. And back then, I think it couldn't be healed in those days. And he was able to heal himself, not being a doctor, but just he can study really good from books, just to back up what Barbara was saying. Anyway, it was great.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate that.
You.
Thank
you
you so much.
Finish that because that's what how got the teacher teaching in the medicine.
Oh, that's another long story. That maybe we should do that another time.
Yeah. We can set up a time to work on some of this material and bring it back to the group to present in the future.
Yeah, because he's got so much of stories that I can talk forever and ever. It sounds like I'm bragging all the time. But anyway, well, it was nice to have Barbara sharing her thoughts with everybody. Yeah. It was great.
Thank you, everybody. It's just been enriched by everybody's input. So, and thank you again to Redmond and Michael and Barry for putting.
Lehrman's going to be on talking about his time studying with Professor Cheng back in New York City, as well as his Tai Chi practice since that time. Again, I would like to thank you all for coming, and please do invite your friends, students, teachers. Redmond will be closing the meeting out now, and thanks again. We'll see you next time. Appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.